If you've spent most of your life feeling more at peace alone than in a crowded room, I want you to stop scrolling right now. Because what I'm about to tell you isn't about being shy. It isn't about being broken. And it definitely isn't something that started when you grew up. It started before you could even put words to it. There was something in you, even as a small child, that already knew it didn't belong to the noise around it. You felt it on the playground while the other kids ran in packs. You felt it at the dinner table when the whole family was laughing, and a part of you was somewhere else entirely. You weren't antisocial. You weren't cold. You were already listening to something most people couldn't hear. And here's what most people miss. That preference for solitude that the world labeled as a flaw, that was never a flaw. It was a fingerprint, a mark, evidence of something that was placed in you, long before your first breath. The ones who feel most alive in the quiet are very often the ones who were born already awake. So today I want to walk through the childhood signs. The ones you brushed off, the ones the adults around you tried to fix, the ones that, looking back now, were never problems at all. They were prophecies. And by the time we're done, I don't think you'll see your younger self the same way again. Let me start with the simplest one. You needed to be alone the way other people needed company. Think about that for a second. Most children are drawn to crowds. They want the party, the group, the constant motion of other bodies around them. They feel safe in the middle of the noise. But you felt safe in the empty room. You'd come home from a day full of people, and you didn't feel filled up. You felt drained, like something had been pulled out of you, and the only thing that put it back was being alone. A corner, a closet, the backyard at the edge of the trees, some quiet place where nobody was asking anything of you. The adults didn't understand it. They said you should go play with the other kids. They worried you were withdrawn. They might have even taken you to someone to ask if something was wrong. But nothing was wrong. You were just built to be refilled by silence instead of crowds, and that's not a defect. That's the design of someone who was made to hear God in the still places. Look at Elijah for a moment. Here was a man who had just stood in front of an entire nation and called down fire from heaven. The crowd had seen it. The whole country was talking about him. And what did he do right after the biggest public moment of his life? He ran into the wilderness. He went out alone, sat under a tree, and asked to be left to himself. And it was there, not in the crowd, not in the spectacle, that God spoke to him. Not in the wind, not in the earthquake, not in the fire. Still, small voice, a whisper. The kind of whisper you can only hear when everything else goes quiet. And notice what happened to him right before that. He was exhausted. He was so worn down by the crowd, and the conflict, and the weight of being seen that he told God he was done. He wanted to lie down and not get up. That's how heavy the noise had become for him. And God didn't scold him for it. God let him sleep. God fed him. God let him rest in the quiet until he had the strength to hear again. Sometimes the reason you crave being alone isn't that you're running from people. It's that your spirit knows it can only be restored in the place where God can reach it without interruption. That's the first sign. You learned, before you had language for it, that the quiet was where you came alive. The world thought you were missing out. You were actually tuning in. And every time the adults pushed you back toward the crowd, a small part of you grieved. Because you knew, even without the words for it, that the crowd was taking something from you that only the quiet could give back. Now here's the second sign, and this one cuts a little deeper. As a child, you felt things that nobody told you about. You'd walk into a room and you'd know. Before anyone said a word, you knew the mood had shifted. You knew when your mom was holding back tears, even though she was smiling. You knew which adult to stay away from at the family gathering, and you couldn't have explained why. You felt the weather of a room the way some people feel rain coming in their bones. And it wasn't always pleasant. Sometimes it was overwhelming. Sometimes you'd come home from somewhere crowded and just need to cry, and you didn't even know what you were crying about. The grown-ups called you sensitive, and they didn't always mean it kindly. Toughen up, they'd say. Don't be so dramatic. Stop taking everything to heart. But here's what they couldn't see. That sensitivity wasn't weakness, it was perception. You were picking up on things that were really there. You just had a receiver that was tuned higher than most. Think about young Samuel, just a boy, sleeping in the temple when a voice called his name in the night. He heard it so clearly that he ran to the priest, Eli, certain he'd been called. But Eli hadn't called him. It happened again and again. The boy could hear what the old priest could not. And finally Eli understood. This child was hearing the voice of God himself. Samuel wasn't imagining things. He wasn't being dramatic. He was a sensitive vessel, and the sensitivity was the whole point. It was what made him able to hear. If you were the child who felt too much, who absorbed the room, who carried home feelings that weren't even yours, that wasn't something to be cured. That was a gift that arrived early, before anyone could teach you how to use it. And the solitude you craved, part of it was simply that you needed to put down all the feelings you'd been carrying. The quiet was where you set the weight down. Let me give you the third sign, because this is one almost every awakened person remembers. You asked questions that made adults uncomfortable. You wanted to know what happens when we die. You wanted to know why people were mean to each other. You wanted to know if God was real, and if he could hear you, and why bad things happen to good people. And you didn't ask these things the way most kids ask, quick, satisfied with any answer. You asked them like you needed to know, like something in you was already wrestling with things that wouldn't fully make sense for years. The adults would laugh it off. Where do you come up with this stuff? You're too young to worry about that. Go play. But you weren't worrying. You were searching. There was an old soul in that small body, and it was looking for the truth, long before the world thought you were ready for it. This is exactly the kind of thing we see in the boy Jesus in the temple. 12 years old. His parents had traveled a full day before they realized he wasn't with them. And when they found him, he wasn't lost and crying. He was sitting among the teachers, asking questions, listening, and giving answers that amazed grown men who had studied their whole lives. When his mother asked why he'd worried them, he simply said he had to be about his father's business. 12 years old, already pulled toward the deep things, already drawn to the questions that matter. If you were that child, the one staring at the ceiling at night, wondering about eternity while everyone else was asleep, you weren't strange. You were awake early. The questions were a sign that your spirit was already reaching for the one who made it. And I want you to notice something about those questions. They never really left you, did they? You might have buried them under work and bills and the busy years of adult life. But late at night, in the hard seasons, when the house finally goes still, they come back. The same questions. Why am I here? What is all this for? Is there more? That's not a phase you failed to outgrow. That's the deepest part of you, still searching for the same God it was reaching for when you were small. The questions didn't stop because they were never meant to. They were the compass all along. Now I want to slow down here, because I know some of you are starting to feel something. Maybe your throat is tight. Maybe you're remembering a version of yourself you'd half forgotten. The lonely kid, the one who sat on the edge, the one who watched. And maybe a lie crept in over the years. The lie that something was wrong with you, that you should have been more like everyone else, that all that aloneness was a mistake. I need you to hear me. It was never a mistake. And here's where it gets real. The fourth sign is this. You were drawn to things bigger than your age. The sky at night, the ocean, storms, the feeling of standing somewhere wide and open, and feeling impossibly small and impossibly held at the same time. While other kids wanted the loud and the flashy, you'd find yourself just staring. At a sunset, at rain on the window, at the way light came through the trees. And in those moments, something opened up in you that you couldn't name. A kind of ache, a kind of wonder, a sense that there was more, so much more, than the small world the adults kept telling you was all there was. David had this. Before he was a king, before he was a giant slayer, he was a boy alone in the fields with the sheep. Long days, long nights, nobody to talk to but God and the stars. And out of all that solitude came the songs, the Psalms. He looked up at the heavens and wrote that they declared the glory of God. He noticed the moon and the stars that God had set in place. And he asked the question that every awakened soul eventually asks. Who am I, that the one who made all this would even think of me? That's not a question you learn in a crowd. That's a question that comes out of the quiet, out of the long hours alone, out of a heart that's been paying attention to the bigness of God. If you were the child who felt small under the stars and somehow loved that feeling, that was your spirit recognizing its maker. You weren't lonely out there. You were in the presence of the only one who fully understood you. And here's the part that breaks my heart a little. Most kids get that wonder trained out of them. The world tells them to grow up, to be practical, to stop daydreaming, to come inside. And one by one, the children who once stared at the sky learned to keep their eyes on the ground. But you, something in you held on. You never fully let it go. That ache for the bigness of God outlasted everyone's attempts to make you ordinary. And the fact that you're still feeling it, even now, even as an adult, tells me the awakening in you was never put to sleep. It just got quiet, waiting. And that brings me to the fifth sign, and this one is heavy. You often felt misunderstood, even by the people who loved you most. It wasn't that your family didn't care. Many of you came from homes full of love, but love isn't the same as understanding. You could be surrounded by people who adored you, and still feel like a stranger at your own table, like you were speaking a language nobody else in the house could quite hear. You'd try to explain how you felt, and it would come out wrong, or it wouldn't come out at all, and you'd just retreat back into yourself. And over time, you learned to stop trying. You kept the deepest part of you private, because experience had taught you that most people couldn't go there with you. Joseph knew this loneliness. He was loved, his father loved him more than all the others, but he was also profoundly misunderstood. He had dreams, real dreams, visions of a future God was showing him, and when he tried to share them, his own brothers turned on him. They mocked him, they resented him. They eventually threw him in a pit and sold him off. The very thing that made him special, the dreams, the calling, the favor, was the thing that isolated him from his own family. And yet those dreams were true. Everything God showed that misunderstood boy came to pass, exactly as he'd seen it, years later when he stood second only to Pharaoh and saved nations from famine. So if you've carried that ache of being misunderstood, even loved and misunderstood at the same time, I want you to consider that maybe it was never because something was wrong with you. Maybe it was because you were carrying something the people around you simply couldn't see yet. The dream was real. They just couldn't dream it with you. And that's a specific kind of loneliness, the loneliness of knowing something true that you can't get anyone else to believe. It would have been easier, in a way, if Joseph had just kept the dreams to himself, buried them, blended in with his brothers. But he couldn't, because what God puts in you doesn't stay buried easily. It leaks out. It shows up in how you talk, how you live, what you hope for. And the people who can't see it sometimes resent the very thing they can't see. If that's been your story, loved by people who never quite got you, you're in good company. The most important dreamer in that entire family was the one nobody understood. Now, before I go on, I want to talk to the one who's been waiting their whole life for permission to take all of this seriously. There are messages that pass through your eyes, and there are messages that pass through your spirit. If something in you recognized itself while watching, don't dismiss it. That is the spirit confirming what was already written. The secret protocol carries 7 keys that unveil what heaven deposited in you before you ever arrived. Things no one around you has ever been able to name. It comes with a full audiobook for your moments of prayer, silence, and encounter with God. And you also receive the Awakening Map, the guide that illuminates the 5 seasons of spiritual awakening, revealing with precision exactly where you are and what comes next. The link is pinned in the first comment, but only for a limited time. Don't let this moment pass without a response. I'm George, and I don't say any of this from a distance. I say it as someone who was that child, the one who hid in the quiet, the one who felt too much and asked too many questions and got told to stop. I spent years thinking I had to fix myself, until the day I understood there was nothing to fix. There was something to wake up to. And that's why I do this. Because somebody needs to tell you the truth the world never did. Let's keep going. Because the signs don't stop in childhood. They grew with you. And if you miss them then, I don't want you to miss them now. Here's the 6th sign. You had a strong sense of justice, even as a small child. You couldn't stand when someone was treated unfairly. You'd see a kid getting picked on, and something in you would burn. You'd see an adult being cruel, and you'd feel it in your stomach. Even when it had nothing to do with you, you took it on. You wanted to fix it, to make it right. And when you couldn't, it haunted you. The grown-ups thought you were being difficult, always making a fuss about things that weren't your business. But it was your business. Your spirit was wired toward righteousness before you even knew the word. Moses had this fire in him, long before God called him. He was raised in a palace, with every comfort, but he couldn't look away from the suffering of his own people. When he saw one of them being beaten, something in him refused to let it stand. The fire was in him from the start. It just hadn't been refined yet. It took years in the wilderness, alone with sheep again, before that raw sense of justice was shaped into the calling that would set a whole nation free. But the fire came first. The fire was the sign. If you were the child who couldn't stomach cruelty, who felt other people's pain like it was your own, who wanted so badly for things to be fair, that wasn't you being difficult. That was a heart that beat in rhythm with God's own heart. He cares about justice more than anyone. And he put a small echo of that caring inside you before you could even understand it. The seventh sign is one that surprises people. You found it hard to lie, and even harder to be fake. While other kids learned early how to perform, how to say the right thing, wear the right mask, blend in to be accepted, you struggled with it. Pretending physically bothered you. Being in a group where everyone was being phony made your skin crawl. You'd rather be alone and real than surrounded and false. And this cost you, especially in your younger years, because the world rewards the people who can play the game. But you couldn't, or you wouldn't. There was an honesty in you that wouldn't bend. Nathanael was like this. When he first heard about Jesus, he was skeptical, even a little blunt about it. Could anything good come from a place like Nazareth? But when Jesus saw him coming, the first thing he said was that here was a man with no deceit in him. No guile, nothing fake. Jesus recognized it instantly, and he honored it. The very directness that might have made Nathanael seem difficult to others was the thing the Lord pointed to and praised. An honest spirit. A man you could trust. If you've always been the one who couldn't fake it, who would rather sit alone than smile a fake smile, who felt almost physically sick around phoniness, that's not a social problem. That's integrity that was installed early. You were made for truth, and truth is lonely sometimes, because not everyone wants it. But God does, and He marked you with it. Now here's something I want you to sit with, because we're getting to the heart of it. All of these signs, the need for solitude, the deep feeling, the big questions, the wonder, the sense of being misunderstood, the burning for justice, the inability to be fake, every single one of them has a shadow side, and the enemy of your soul knows it. The need for solitude can curdle into isolation. The deep feeling can turn into being constantly overwhelmed. The big questions can spiral into anxiety. The sense of being misunderstood can harden into bitterness, into a wall, into giving up on people entirely. The very gifts that mark you as someone born awake can become the very chains that keep you stuck. If you don't understand what they are, that's the part most people never learn. They feel different their whole lives, and because nobody ever explained the design to them, they spend decades thinking their wiring is a burden instead of a calling. They medicate the sensitivity. They run from the solitude or drown in it. They bury the questions. They let the wonder die, and the awakening that was meant to bloom just goes dormant, like a seed that never got water. I don't want that for you. I think you found this for a reason. Because here's the truth about every one of those biblical lives I just walked you through. Elijah in the wilderness, Samuel in the night, David in the fields, Joseph in the pit, Moses in the desert. Not one of them had their gift fully formed in childhood. Every one of them had a long, lonely stretch where the gift looked like a problem, where the solitude looked like exile, where the calling looked like a curse. Joseph spent years as a slave and a prisoner before the dreams came true. Moses spent 40 years tending sheep before the burning bush. David ran for his life for years before he ever sat on the throne. The aloneness wasn't a punishment, it was the preparation. So if you're in a lonely season right now, if you're the grown-up version of that child who never quite fit, I don't want you to read it as rejection. I want you to read it as the field, the wilderness, the temple at night, the place where the still small voice does its work. The world is loud and the loud rarely hear God. But you've been able to hear the quiet your whole life. That was never a weakness. That was always the point. Some of you needed to hear that today more than you can say. Because somewhere along the way, somebody convinced you that the most authentic part of you was the problem. A teacher, a parent who didn't mean any harm, a culture that prizes the loud and the smooth and the popular. And you believed it. You spent years trying to become someone the world would clap for. And the whole time, the thing you were trying to fix was the very thing God had marked. I want you to do something with me before we close. I want you to think back to the youngest version of yourself you can clearly remember. The one who sat alone and didn't know why. The one who felt too much. The one who asked the big questions into the dark. And I want you to stop being ashamed of that child. Because that child was right. That child knew something the adults had forgotten. That child was already awake. The aloneness you were taught to fix was the doorway you were meant to walk through. Every prophet, every dreamer, every person God ever pulled aside for something bigger learned to be comfortable in the quiet first. They had to, because you can't carry a message you've never heard, and you can't hear a whisper in a stadium. God took them to the wilderness on purpose. And maybe, just maybe, that's what He's been doing with you this whole time. Not abandoning you to loneliness, drawing you into the only place quiet enough to finally tell you who you are. You were not born to blend in. You were born already listening, and the silence you ran to as a child was never empty. It was full. Full of the one who made you that way on purpose, waiting in the quiet for the day you'd finally turn around and recognize his voice. The same voice you've been hearing, faintly, since before you had the words to name it. So here's what I want you to do, and I want you to be specific. In the comments, tell me about the place. The actual place where you went to be alone as a child. The closet, the tree, the corner of the yard, the spot under the stairs, name it. And tell me one thing you used to feel there that you couldn't feel anywhere else. Not a general answer, the real one. Because I have a feeling that if we put all those quiet places together, we'd find a whole army of people who were awake long before the world ever noticed. And I want to read every single one.